Hello? Yes. Pick it up? Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. There's a chair up here. I'm not sure why. Maybe for John later. But you guys know me. My chances of sitting while I'm teaching are pretty well nil because I like to wander around. Anyway, it's good to have all of you here, and it's going to be another 90-degree day today. Even hotter tomorrow, about 100 degrees tomorrow. And 90, I think 97 Tuesday, or Monday, I mean. No, Tuesday. Today is Sunday. So it's going to be pretty hot next few days. And someone asked me if I'm running in this weather, and I said, yes, I am, but I don't start running until about 9 o'clock in the evening. And even then, it's the dew point's so high. Some of us never learn, you know. We've been looking at the Gospel of Mark, and last week we finished chapter 15, the crucifixion of Jesus. And Jesus died about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus that he could bury Jesus. And Joseph of Arimathea was one of the leaders of the Jews, but he obviously had a different impression of Jesus than some of the other leaders. And Pilate granted Joseph the right to bury Jesus, which, as I also mentioned, was not always given to someone who was accused of treason, as Jesus was. But then again, the Jews were very adamant about burying their dead. So Pilate was probably aware of that and did not want to upset anybody either. Now, in Mark, at the very end, it says Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph and Simeon, they saw where Joseph of Arimathea buried Jesus. And why do you think they followed to make sure about where he was buried? What were they planning to do?
He hadn't been consecrated. He hadn't used the ceremonies done for us. And they couldn't do it because it was coming along the Sabbath.
Well, even though Joseph washed the body, Joseph and his assistants, it was tradition for later on for people to put spice on the body. The Jews did not mummify like the Egyptians did. They did not typically burn the bodies like the Greeks and Romans did. They buried the body. And so they did not have our modern methods, and so the body would reek. So they put spices to eliminate that, and as an honor to the dead. So they see where Jesus is buried, so that their plan is after the Sabbath, that they're going to go early that first day of the week, our present day Sunday, and back to the tomb and anoint the body of Jesus. Okay? And so in verse 1 of chapter 16, it says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. So probably about the break of dawn. Now, most likely that would be Passover usually corresponds to our late spring. So late spring would be about 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe, when the sun would come up. Something like that, yeah. So it's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and they get up to anoint the body of Jesus just after sunrise, it says. And on their way, they're walking to the tomb with their spices, and of course, I'm sure their feeling is they're very down, very upset, very sad that this has happened to Jesus, who they'd been following since Galilee. So these women had known Jesus for a long, long time and had been following him and listening to his teaching for maybe 3 years. So on their way, I'm sure they're feeling pretty depressed, pretty down. But they also started thinking, okay, we saw Joseph and his assistants, roll the stone. Who's going to roll the stone? It's just us. And as I mentioned, the stone was probably circular, and there was a groove that they would typically roll the stone across the tomb. And so they're thinking, okay, who's going to roll the stone for us? Do you think the three of us could do this? So while they're thinking about this, they look up when they get there, and they see the stone's already rolled open. Whoa, well, what do you think they first thought?
Even stolen.
Yeah, has somebody robbed the grave? And you can imagine their shock, their horror. I mean, that's, even today, robbing a grave is a desecration, isn't it? Yeah. And so they look up and they see this large stone had been rolled away. And you can imagine when they're entering the tomb, they were probably pretty creeped out. What are they going to find here? Okay. Now, they go into the tomb, and most likely the tomb wasn't that deep. So there'd still be light enough to see. Okay. If you see the tombs that have been excavated that go back to that time, they're not that deep. So you can easily see in there. And they look up and they see the stones rolling. They enter the tomb, and they see a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side. Whoa, who is this? They don't recognize him, obviously. And if he's a grave robber, what's he doing sitting there? Okay? So this is just an odd, strange thing taking place. And he must have wondered, okay, what's going on here? And it says they were alarmed. And you can imagine if you were in that situation, you would be too. What is going on? Now, the other gospel writers refer to angels. Was this man an angel? Very possibly. Mark doesn't describe him that way. And he tells them, don't be afraid or don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? Now, do you think these women understood yet? I don't think so. It was pretty clear that even though, and we'll look at some of these passages in a minute, Jesus had been telling them over and over and over throughout his ministry what's going to happen. But even his apostles didn't fully understand. So they're probably saying, what the heck is he talking about? What do you mean he's risen? What do you mean he's alive? This doesn't make any sense. Okay? And, think about it. If you were in their situation, it's always not, we know now the end of the story, so to speak. But try to put yourself back into their place. Would you be a little scared? Would you be surprised, astonished, alarmed? I think all those things are probably the feelings that these women are having. Like, what's going on? That probably would have been literally what I would have said. What's going on here?
Didn't Jesus tell them many times that this is what was going to happen?
Yes, he did. In fact, let's look at some of those passages. Okay, let's Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 33. It's right after Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ. In verse 29, but what do you guys say? Jesus asked the apostles. Who do you say I am? And Peter answered, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. And at that point, Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about it. He doesn't want this word out yet. And then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, but look at Peter's reaction. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. No, you're the Messiah. What you're talking about, the Messiah is not supposed to be killed. He's supposed to be the eternal ruler over David. So Peter is making the same mistake that probably a lot of other disciples made, that any concept of messiahship of Jesus is seen as primarily a political Messiah. Even Peter, he's just confessed that he's a Messiah, but he still doesn't get it. And what does Jesus say? Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, and they rebuked Peter. Out of my sight, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Peter, you've just said I'm the Christ, but it's obvious you and the other disciples don't get it yet. I'm the Christ that God has. His kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. Thinking about the political type of Messiah. You're not with me yet. Okay. And then in the next chapter, several times, chapter 9, Jesus, there's a transfiguration where there's a vision where with Peter, James, and John, he goes up to a mountain and they're all alone, and he's transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And he did not know really what to say because he was frightened. He just kind of blurted out the first thing. Peter seems to be kind of one of those people, like he blurts out what comes to his mind. Okay? Sometimes that's good, but sometimes, people around someone like that says, I wish he wouldn't have said that. Okay. And maybe you're one of those people that is hard to keep, being openly honest. Sometimes being openly honest is not openly good.
I would say
Impulsive, yeah, impulse control. Yeah, thank you. That actually was kind of the term I was looking for, but it just wasn't there. So they a voice comes from heaven and says, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." More than Elijah, the prophets, or Moses, the giver of the law. Suddenly they looked around and they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. And again, Jesus tells them, don't tell everyone that what you've just seen until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. And they kept the matter to themselves, but they were discussing what rising from the dead meant. So they're still not sure about this. Not every Jew believed in the resurrection. What group did not believe in the resurrection particularly? The Sadducees. And they were the chief priests, the priestly. They were the supreme rulers. The Sadducees were really in control. The Pharisees were politically important and kind of co-ruled with them, but the Sadducees really had the power. And the Essenes, the Jewish group that preserved for us the Dead Sea Scrolls, they didn't really talk about the resurrection either. So, and I don't believe the Samaritans did either. Sometimes we need to remember that during the time of Jesus, there were a lot of different Jewish sects, groups. It wasn't all Pharisees, all Sadducees, all Essenes. Even in Galilee, there were some interesting groups that focused on the coming of God. So,
What were the zealots?
what?
What were the zealots?
The Zealots were a political party. And that's another group. They believed that Rome was the oppressor that needed to be overthrown. They had no business being in control of Israel. And we must do whatever we can to overthrow them. And many of the Zealots then, they believed that then the Messiah would be, his role would be to lead people like the Zealots to overthrow Romans and reinstitute the kingdom of David with a new king, a new Messiah. Very political. And that's why I suggested earlier that probably Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus, probably never moved beyond that point. And that could very well be why he decided to betray Jesus, because he's at the end there discovered that Jesus is not that kind of Messiah. And that makes, to me, the most sense about trying to explain Judas. Okay, we don't know for sure, but I think that makes the most sense. That when Jesus overthrew the things in the temple, Judas and others who of that mind probably thought, okay, this is it. This is the rebellion. It started. But when Jesus left and backed off and obviously did not lead a rebellion, I think that Judas that was very disillusioning to him. He said, well, he's not the right Messiah. We should get rid of him. He's not going to do what I thought he was going to do. So Jesus here, he's talked about rising from the dead, and his closest apostles, Peter, John, and James, they don't get it still. Let's look at another passage in that same chapter, verses 30 through 32. He healed someone who had been possessed, and the disciples asked him, why couldn't we drive it out? And he said, well, this kind only comes out by prayer. And they left that place and passed through Galilee, and Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were. See, Jesus is already aware that he's a marked man, because he was teaching his disciples. And he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. But they didn't understand. But they were afraid to ask. They probably felt like if you've been in a class and you're not sure of something, but you're afraid to ask because you don't want to be embarrassed, because you think you're maybe the only one that doesn't know. But I remember the first time I was in a college class, I was so happy to realize I wasn't the only one that didn't know the answers. And that freed me. But I could understand why they were reluctant to push it, because, if you're Peter, someone like Peter especially, and you're not sure, do you want to indicate to your close brothers that, you're as dumb as they are? Or dumber?
They may have had an inkling of what he was saying, and they really didn't want to hear it.
I'm sorry, what?
I think that some of them may have had an inkling of what he was saying, and they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear he was going to die. They didn't want to hear it, and that's why they didn't ask him anymore.
Well, and if some of them were still pointing toward a political kind of Messiah, the resurrection had no role in that. So again, you could see why there'd be some cross currents in their minds about, okay, what kind of Messiah? We believe he's a Messiah. He's a great teacher. He's done all these miracles, but what does this resurrection have to do with anything? So, they're definitely not understanding. Okay. In chapter 10, the next chapter, 10, verses 32 through 34. They were on their way up to Jerusalem, Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Why are they astonished that Jesus is leading them into Jerusalem at this time? What has he been telling them not to do? Don't tell anybody what you know. Don't tell anybody where I am. Now he's going directly into Jerusalem. What's he doing now? And some of them were amazed, and some were scared, because they realized, we know the chief priests and the leaders are already really out to get him, so why is he going right directly into their center? So again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen. We're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. That's even more specific, isn't it? He describes verbatim what we later on read happened. I'm guessing that probably what stuck in their minds was this whole being arrested and flogged and crucified. I'm not sure the very end, 3 days later he will rise. I'm not sure if they really heard that. Again, I'm just extrapolating here. I'm just guessing. But they still don't get it. Reading on, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him and said, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." Boy, that's got a lot of gall, isn't it? Jesus, we want you to do whatever we want you to do for us. And let one of us sit on your right and the other on your left in your glory. And again, what are they talking about? I think they're talking about a political Messiah. Let me be your right-hand man, and I'll be your left-hand man. We'll be we'll be the king's aides, direct counselors. And Jesus said, "You don't know what you're asking for. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" And they answered, "We can." What cup and what baptism was Jesus talking about there? Yeah, the cup that he would later refer to as signifying his blood. So they just do not get it. The political Messiah, the resurrection, it just doesn't mean much to them. And in chapter 14, verses 23 through 25. This is when he provides the first Lord's Supper. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." And then he took the cup and gave thanks and offered it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. I tell you the truth, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God." Again, when we discussed this passage a few weeks ago, the disciples must have wondered, what the heck is he referring to? What do you mean, eat my body? What do you mean, drink my blood? And, drinking blood is just absolutely a no-no. Okay? And then when he says, I will not eat or drink of this again until I do in my kingdom, in my kingdom to come. And again, that's a referrer to when he will eat and drink the cup again with his disciples after his resurrection. They don't know this, do they? I can't imagine they had any clue what Jesus is talking about during this Lord's Supper. I really don't. They had no clue that he was going to be the Passover lamb. So you can imagine up to this point, these are the to us very clear indications. Look, I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be brought before the Jewish leaders and condemned, and then they're going to hand me over to the Gentiles, which would mean Pilate, and he will crucify me. I'll be mocked and insulted, and then I'll rise again. All these warnings, all these indications that for us are very easy to see because we're looking back, but for them, no. So when we get back to the two Marys, we begin to understand. Now, they were probably not even given as much information or prediction as the apostles were, but they must have heard something. But they're even more in the dark than the apostles. And so this man who's sitting there and says, "Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus who has been crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? Go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee, and there you will see him, just as I told you." Now, again, imagine the amazement. This processing this. Okay, where is this body? Now, the Jewish and the Romans authorities said, okay, who stole the body? But this did not happen. They must have, did the women, when they went back with the report to the disciples, did they still think maybe the body had been stolen? Maybe. And the man dressed in the white robe said, he told you he will go before you to Galilee, and there you will see him. The other Gospels mention that at this time the disciples were hiding. They had the door locked because they were still afraid that others would associate them with this rebel, with this king of the Jews who was seen as a traitor by the Romans, someone who had to be eliminated. So in verse 8, it says they were trembling and bewildered. They still are really, this is really a shaky thing to be going through. Can you imagine all the thoughts that they were thinking? And again, one of the best ways to interpret the Bible is to try to put yourself back into their time, and not just simply read into it what we already know from our time. And again, these women, this is all very, very shocking. Well, think about it. If you went to a gravesite of someone you had been following, a disciple, or you're a disciple or whatever, and you go to the gravesite and the tomb's been opened, and there's no body. And then you have someone tell you, he's not here, he's risen. How would you react? What? What do you mean? This doesn't happen. Many people today would say it can't happen. They doubt the power of God. Oh, Jesus, he couldn't have been risen, because we know that doesn't happen. Have any of you seen anybody risen from the dead? I haven't. Yeah, Jesus did raise Lazarus. They did see that. So, and that's that account is told in John particularly, but that was more seen. I think that was seen more as a miracle of Jesus' power, not necessarily as a prediction of what would happen to him. Maybe not. Yeah. Well, that's a good way of. Maybe he didn't think he could raise himself. Well, you wouldn't think about it. If you're dead, how would you raise yourself? Okay. But again, they're not seeing that there's something truly unique about this Jesus of Nazareth. He does not fit into all these little profiles that so many people in his land, and even later outside of his land, try to see him. Yes?
These women also saw him nailed to the cross and crucified, and they were there all day.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew what happened to
Right.
the man Jesus, okay? And that's what they.
Right. You can imagine the women who saw him die. That would be an impression that would be 3 days later would still be very definitely on their mind.
It's like us, who have known people who were there and they died, and that memory of that thing stays with us.
It does,
And
and
it had to be with them.
right, even more so. Yeah.
And they all knew. When you were nailed and crucified, you died.
Yeah.
And in fact, Jesus was unique in that he was taken from his body to soul. Everyone else did not come down like that.
Right. A lot of times the Romans, particularly those who were accused of treason, king of the Jews, were left to hang on the cross for days. But I think I mentioned to you last week or the week before, I've held hands of people who've died. I still remember that. I still can tell you the scene. And that was not an execution. Those deaths were not brutal. So you're right, Novi. I think that, that the impression in their mind must have been just overwhelming.
And that was common even back then. Okay, that's not unique to us, but it's almost standard.
Well, yeah, crucifixion they saw that a lot. Yeah, they did. When you look at Josephus and other sources, you see that crucifixion happened a lot, and that there were a lot of attempted rebellions. Well, Barabbas and probably the two who died with Jesus were very likely involved in that insurrection before Jesus. So, and then there's an account that Josephus gives of about 10 years, maybe 8 years before Jesus, where there was a major insurrection where a man claimed to be the Messiah. And very likely, Ananias and Caiaphas had seen that, and that was partly their motive too. John tells us in his gospel that was their motive. We don't want that to happen again. What we're seeing is potentially another one of those, and we remember the bodies in the street. And again, that movie Jesus of Nazareth that Zeffirelli directed is probably the best portrait of Jesus, and especially it really portrays the high priests and their motives. I really recommend you see that sometime. So the women are bewildered, they're puzzled, they're confused too, probably, right? And like you said, you know, the image that's stuck in their mind is Jesus' body. Everything they were thinking about since that crucifixion was the body of Jesus. They want to anoint it, give it the final respect, and so this messenger with in the white robe. I mean, it's just, what's the term? Cognitive dissonance. You know, it doesn't fit. That just doesn't fit. And yes.
Even Armathea had to be of the same mind.
I'm sorry, what?
Armathea.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Joseph and
He
Mary.
had to have the same mind, because what did he do? He made a tomb for his family and put Jesus' body in there and wrapped him up.
Mm-hmm.
And put that stone in there, because that was the tradition of Jews.
Yeah.
And then the Jews and Romans got back together to seal that thing somehow, some way.
Yeah. The Jews and Romans, the only explanation they could come up with is somebody stole the body. Now, interestingly, though, they never found the body. All right.
The body found them.
Yeah. Good way. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, yeah, I've often wondered what Joseph of Arimathea was thinking when he heard what happened. And it's very likely he became a Christian. You know, he already was it was obvious he was a follower. You know, he respected Jesus. And, but can you imagine what he might have thought? Wait a minute, I made sure the stone was tight. It was, what do you mean that there's no body there? Now, Mark's gospel, the women they fled from the tomb. They want to get out of there. This is spooky. Have you ever felt that way, where things are just too overwhelming? You just want to get out of there as fast as possible? Yeah. Well, especially if somebody's coming to beat you up. But I'm just referring to more common experience for boys. So the women went out, fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone. They're not going to broadcast what they've just seen to anybody they pass on the street at this point. And then it says, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Now, in the original text of Mark, this is where Mark ends. The earliest texts that we have that are most accurate, this is the final statement in Mark. The other part that was added were later added because Christians didn't think that the gospel should end that way. Wait a minute. What do you mean? Your final word is that they were afraid. And the word here, afraid, is specifically they were fearful. It's not that they were amazed or astonished, which is often used in the gospel too, but they were afraid. What were they afraid of? What?
The Roman leaders.
Yeah, they were still maybe afraid of the, if they were associated, and now that the body is missing, are they going to be blamed? Well, you women had something to do with it because you were the first ones to get there. And this nonsense about this body just suddenly disappearing and this man appearing doesn't make, what Roman would believe that? What about the Jewish authorities? You women, you know who stole the body. You need to tell us. We'll force it out of you. Okay? Any other possible reasons they'd be afraid?
Well, they thought he was going to rescue them, and he died a horrible death, and then he disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
That is frightening.
Yeah.
Like, what now? Like, all our hope is dashed.
Yeah, okay. We knew he was gone. He's dead. Now he's missing. Again, what's going on?
You also don't necessarily, if you're still in that state of disbelief, don't want to run into the people that stole him.
Mm-hmm. They're still grieving. They still don't understand. They're afraid. They're probably afraid of, okay, did we really see what we saw? Maybe I'm going crazy. That's scary. Okay. So it's really fascinating that Mark's gospel would end like that. And again, that's why later scribes would add the other part that are found in Matthew and Luke. But if you go back and look, one of the themes in Mark is that Jesus, his miracles, his powers, he is a man of great power who astonishes, overwhelms, and scares people. Why would that be important for a Roman reader to know that about Jesus? Yeah, exactly. The Romans, I mean, if you want to talk about putting up a man to be esteemed, a man of power. So Jesus' miracles, the reaction of the crowds and even the disciples is they're amazed, they're overwhelmed, they're kind of scared of that kind of power. Okay? Have you ever been around power where you're intimidated? I know in sports, sometimes you come across a tremendous athlete who is intimidating because they're powerful. They kind of put the scare into you a little bit. Okay. When I was at the University of Iowa, I would see some of the wrestlers, and I'd be in the same gym. And I'll tell you what, if they'd come up to me and say, "Hey, you want to wrestle?" Oh no, I'd be quite intimidated. Okay, I was in good shape, and I could handle myself pretty well, but no, not at that level. I would be a little scared, especially if they were pushing it. So Jesus, when I taught the Gospel of Mark at college, I would really emphasize that Mark's portrayal of Jesus is the powerful, amazing one. And this would be most appealing to a Roman audience. And very likely Mark is writing his gospel to a Roman audience or close to there. And so in many ways, the fact that they left with Jesus having been raised and about ready sometime here in the near future to see the resurrected Christ, they are scared, they're afraid. And that fits into Jesus is that kind of leader. And we know that he did appear to the disciples. And the other Gospels indicate he appeared in Jerusalem, because I think he had to, because they still didn't get it. they didn't head on back to Galilee, did they? He had to make a special appearance and say, no, it is really me. And remember Thomas? He still didn't believe him. I won't believe it until I see his wounds. And when Jesus appears, he said, well, Thomas, come on over here and touch my wounds. Okay? And Thomas is really, I think, very much like we are. I'm not going to believe it until I see it. And so the women are a great example of what it means to be a disciple. Even Jesus kept telling them over and over again, it's really hard to believe what Jesus was predicting. And because Jesus was raised, we are all here. And the kingdom of God is here. And we don't have to wait for a king to rise in Jerusalem, because our king has already risen. And the kingdom is within us, because it's our faith in Christ, our discipleship in Christ is the kingdom of God displayed in us. Okay, well, thank you very much. And this morning we're going to have the pleasure of having John preach again. So, and I think next week he said he's going to teach again. So you're finally going to get rid of me for a while.